Colleagues, aviators, history enthusiasts, before you dive into this massive article, do me one small but important favor. Subscribe to the channel. Because the story I'm about to tell you isn't just a dry list of facts. It's a tale of ambition, brilliant breakthroughs, and fatal mistakes paid for in blood. The story of a ghost plane that could have changed everything but ended up changing nothing. This is the Yak-2. And if you've ever admired the might of flying fortresses or the elegance of fighters, you need to understand why this beauty, this record breaker, never became a terror of the skies. Promise you won't get bored. And at the end, I'm waiting for your comments, your theories, your what-ifs. Let's go. A world holding its breath. Imagine a world on the edge of an abyss. The late 30s. Europe already smells of smoke. The only thing it doesn't smell of is naivety. Hitler is pacing back and forth over maps, the Japanese are deep into war in China, and in the USSR, a colossal, frantic, unimaginably vast effort is underway. The country understands war is inevitable, and it will be a war of engines, a war of technology, a war in the air. The Spanish sky had already shown Soviet military men and engineers a harsh truth. Our I-15 and I-16 fighters, considered marvels just yesterday, were already losing to the new German Messerschmitts. A leap forward was needed, qualitative one. But what kind? Some said we need invulnerable flying tanks armored with powerful armament. Others, enchanted by De Het's theory, the idea that victory would come through mass bombings, shouted, "We need heavy bombers, entire armadas." And a third group, young and daring, looked at the record speeds of sports planes and whispered, "What if we made a bomber faster than any fighter? It just wouldn't let itself be caught." This third idea, the idea of a high-speed short-range bomber, was incredibly seductive. Promised victory with little bloodshed, through technical superiority, an elegant solution. And in 1938, in the design bureau of Alexander Sergeyevich Yakovlev, then famous primarily for light, fast-as-an-arrow sports and training machines, remember the beautiful UT-2, work began on something completely new, risky, ambitious. The project received the modest index Aircraft 22. It was led by engineer Leonid Lvovich Schechter. They were challenging not only their competitors Sukhoi, Tupolev, Ilyushin, they were challenging themselves, the laws of aerodynamics and common sense. The birth of a courier, when speed is everything. So the task was set with ultimate, almost insane clarity. A speed above 600 kilometers per hour. For context, the best serial fighters in the world at that time, the Messerschmitt Bf 109E, could do about 550 to 570 km/h. Imagine a bomber 50 kilometers per hour faster than a fighter. That would mean complete impunity. Fly in, drop bombs, vanish into the blue. A dream. But how to achieve it? The M103 engines were good, but not monstrously powerful, 960 horsepower each. So, the aircraft had to be lightened and streamlined like never before. Schechter's team went all in, making decisions that made traditional aircraft builders' hair stand on end. The blade wing. Instead of the usual split wing with a powerful spar, they made a one-piece, all-wood, non-detachable wing with an incredibly small airfoil thickness and a monstrously high wing loading. How many kilograms the plane weighs per square meter of wing? It was like attaching two razor blades to the fuselage. Such a wing created minimal drag but was fragile, unforgiving of errors, and had nasty aerodynamic quirks. The tube fuselage. The fuselage frame was made of steel tubes, the skin fabric. Light, cheap, and utterly defenseless against fire even from a heavy machine gun. No armor, no self-sealing fuel tanks. Aerodynamic purity. The pilot and navigator's cabins were recessed into the fuselage contours, creating one smooth line. The canopy was low like a teardrop. All protruding parts were sought to be removed or fared over. The most radical solution, radiators in the tail. To maximally clean the wings and engine nacelles from extra bellies, the engine water radiators were moved to the tail sections of the nacelles. Air was supplied to them through long, thin ducts. A solution for the late 30s, simply cosmic. Beautiful, theoretically correct, but in practice, a time bomb. And you know what? The very first flights in early 1939 showed they succeeded. The machine, then still Aircraft 22, reached 500, then more, km/h in tests. It was a sensation. The military, seeing these numbers, forgave the future Yak-2 its still hidden sins. It seemed the dream was becoming metal, or rather, wood, steel, and fabric. But the first serious tests at the Flight Research Institute (WWII) revealed a terrible flaw: the demon of speed and the engineer's nightmare. Testers discovered a fatal defect in the aircraft, professionally called longitudinal instability at high speeds. Simply put, upon reaching a speed of about 480 kilometers per hour, the plane seemed to go mad. If the pilot slightly moved the stick forward or back, the machine wouldn't smoothly change its angle but would start swinging like a seesaw. The nose would sharply pitch up, then drop, and these oscillations could intensify, leading to loss of control or structural failure. Imagine speeding in a race car and, upon trying to turn the wheel slightly, the car first goes into a violent skid and then flies off the track. For a combat aircraft that needed to accurately approach a target and evade anti-aircraft fire, this was a death sentence. Why did this happen? That beautiful thin wing was to blame. It was designed for speed but didn't feel the airflow steadily across all flight regimes. This was the first, but not the last, stop cry from reality. Then it got worse. The curse of overheating. The radical scheme with tail radiators turned into an engineering nightmare. The long air ducts created enormous resistance, and the radiators themselves, hidden deep in the tail, cooled poorly. The M103 engines, already operating at their limit, began to boil literally before one's eyes. Climbing to an altitude of 7,000 meters, which according to calculations should have taken 8 to 9 minutes, stretched to 35. Why? Because by the 5th minute, the oil temperature would soar above 120 degrees, forcing the pilot to reduce throttle, fly level to let the engine rest. In combat, such an opportunity wouldn't exist. On the ground, one couldn't approach the engine nacelles without canvas gloves for 20 to 30 minutes after engine shutdown. They remained red-hot. Landing became Russian roulette. The brake drums overheated instantly, and fires during the landing run were common. The wheel tires, unable to withstand the heat from the brakes and the proximity of the scorching nacelles, became unusable after every 5 or 6 flights. A paradox emerged. An aircraft created for high-speed flight couldn't fly at high speed for long. It was like a sprinter with a bad heart who can dash off the line but collapses after 100 meters. A soldier of 3 faces. A tactical dead end. Now let's step away from engineering problems and look at the concept. What did the military actually want? They wanted, as often happens, everything at once. The technical requirements were vague, born of the then fashionable idea of a universal aircraft. The Yak-2 was required to be a high-speed short-range bomber carrying up to 400 kilograms of bombs, a reconnaissance aircraft, for which one variant even had a prone position for the navigator to observe downwards, a 2-seat escort fighter with a powerful cannon in the nose. The result was a Frankenstein. The cockpit was so cramped that pilots joked, "You sit like in a coffin." The navigator, who in case of need was supposed to fire a machine gun, literally had to crawl into his position like into a burrow. Bombs were placed vertically inside the fuselage. Inconvenient, time-consuming, dangerous. Converting it into a reconnaissance or fighter plane required changing half the equipment. For serial factories already struggling with new, complex technology, this was hell. And most importantly, survivability. In the pursuit of speed, it was utterly forgotten. Fuel tanks weren't self-sealing. No armor. The structure was fragile. One successful burst from a German fighter's heavy machine gun, and they were already on the Bf-109 and Bf-110. And the clothes on bones, another pilot nickname, would turn into a torch. It didn't need to be chased head-on. It was enough to intercept it en route, catch it in a turn, on takeoff or landing. And with its problems climbing and overheating, where could it go? The competitor that arrived just in time. The birth of the pawn. While the Yakovlev team struggled with their fast but capricious brainchild, in another design bureau, Vladimir Mihailovich Petliakov's, work was underway on its own aircraft. Initially, it was the high-altitude fighter 6100. But, Analyzing trends, Petlyakov, under Tupolev's guidance, then independently boldly converted it into a dive bomber. Thus, the P-2 was born. Let's compare them, as the military did then. See the table in the original text, but I'll explain the essence. Speed. Yak-2 ideally, 515 km/h. Serial PE-2, 540 km/h. Almost parity, but the Pawn achieved this speed without voodoo dances and the risk of going into longitudinal oscillations. Payload. Yak-2, 400 kg internally. P-2, 600 kg, and up to a ton in overload, not only internally but also externally. Crew. 2 men on the Yak versus 3 on the P-2. The navigator bombardier and radio operator gunner on the Pawn drastically increased its combat effectiveness and defensive capability. Manufacturability. The P-2, though more complex, had a design more thoughtful for mass production. It wasn't raw. Handling. The P-2 was stable, predictable. Pilots of average skill weren't afraid of it. The P-2 didn't try to be a record holder. It aimed to be an effective soldier. And it succeeded. It became the workhorse of frontline aviation, performing roles as a bomber, reconnaissance plane, and even a fighter. There were such modifications. The Yak-2 remained a self-satisfied aristocrat with a host of ailments. Bitter results and lessons written in blood. The aircraft entered series production under pressure, under the Index BB-22, short-range bomber, then Yak-2 and Yak-4, with M105 engines. Factories unprepared for such a complex machine produced frankly defective units. Gaps in the skin, misaligned engine installations, poorly made radiator tunnels. The speed of serial machines rarely exceeded 500 kilometers per hour. Range, instead of the claimed 1,200 kilometers, barely reached 700 with bombs in practice. When war broke out, the few regiments equipped with Yak-2/4 suffered horrific losses. Not because the pilots were bad. The aircraft was not ready for the realities of war. It burned like a candle, was difficult to handle for a battle-weary pilot, and couldn't be operated from field airfields. It was quickly withdrawn from production and replaced by that same P-2 and simpler Su-2. So what was the main mistake? It was an ambitious error of priorities. The designers and the customers fell in love with a single characteristic, speed, and sacrificed everything to it. Survivability, stability, manufacturability, ease of maintenance, crew safety. They created a one-day wonder, a record-breaking plane that couldn't perform daily soldierly service. The story of the Yak-2 is a lesson for all times, not just in aviation, in business, technology, life. The pursuit of a single wow effect, a single superparameter, at the expense of balance, reliability, and common sense, leads to failure. You can create the world's fastest car, but if its air conditioning doesn't work and it breaks down every 50 kilometers, no one will buy it. The Yak-2 was the product of a beautiful but naive belief that technology could cancel the laws of war. War, however, always proves simpler and harsher. It requires not brilliant but fragile tools, but simple, reliable, and fail-proof ones like a hammer. The Pawn became such a hammer, and the elegant, fast Yak-2 remained in history as a sad monument to how ambition outpaced reality. So, colleagues, what do you think? Am I being too harsh on the Yak-2? Maybe it just didn't have enough time? What if they had solved the cooling problems? Or maybe there was something in this plane that was truly ahead of its time. Write in the comments, let's argue, discuss. And if this story, this drama of metal and human ideas, hooked you, like and subscribe to the channel. There are many more such ambiguous, intriguing, and instructive stories from the world of technology ahead. Thanks for reading to the end. Your opinion matters.